Hello and good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Beam, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Kansas Secretary of Agriculture at the Kansas Department of Agriculture. Welcome to this webinar, which is focused on the industrial hemp industry in Kansas. I appreciate you taking your time this evening for this discussion and perhaps discuss how we can work together to grow this new and exciting commodity in our state. You'll find out that we have a packed 90-minute session this evening that includes updates from the Department of Agriculture, our industrial hemp program staff, United States Department of Agriculture, the Kansas Fire Marshal, the Kansas Bankers Association, and most importantly, we have a chance to hear from firsthand from Kansas industrial hemp growers and processors. I'm proud of our team who've orchestrated this program tonight. And first, I will recognize our ag marketing agency or division. And with that division is Russell Plaska. Russell, let me turn it over to you at this time.
Thank you, Secretary Beam, and welcome everybody to this evening's session. As Secretary Beam pointed out, we do have a very packed 90 minutes, so we're going to dive right in, but I do have a few housekeeping details for us. So during this presentation, as most of you are familiar with Zoom meetings, we are going to ask that you stay muted. That way we'll allow our presenters to be heard. If you have a question during this presentation, please put it in the chat. Dana, myself, as well as Robin Bloom with the agency will be monitoring those questions, so we'll get them answered toward the end of the program, but we want to be sure and leave time for all of our presenters and panels. So again, there should be time for those questions. We do have some time built in at the end of the processor and producers. So if we have time at that point, we can answer a few questions. Also, I need to acknowledge that so if you need to ask a question during that time, if you don't want to put it in the chat, raise your hand. You can use the little emotions, the raise your hand icon, and we'll see that and make sure and call on you. And lastly, I want to remind you this session is being recorded and we will put it online for further viewing later. So with that, our first presenter this evening is Braden Hawk. Braden is our industrial hemp supervisor here at the Kansas Department of Agriculture, and Braden's going to provide us with a few updates on the industrial hemp program. So Braden, Zoom is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Russ. Once again, my name is Braden Hoke. I'm the industrial hemp supervisor with the Kansas Department of Agriculture. I'm also joined by Mr. Jason Teal, the industrial hemp technician with the KDA. And again, I would like to reiterate many thanks for y'all participating tonight and being willing to listen to the industry here, the growers and the processors. I would like to say that I will be available for questions after the Q&A session later this evening. I will be referring to the hemp summary, which was disseminated by Dana Ladner. That was titled Hemp Summary 11-3-2021 as I speak. So a little bit of background. Hemp is, if you don't know, is defined in the 2018 Farm Bill as a plant species of cannabis sativa in any part of the plant, including its seeds, all derivatives, extracts, whether growing or not, with a delta-9 THC concentration of not more than 0.3% on a dry weight basis. So here in Kansas, I guess since hemp's prohibition, production was first authorized in the 2018 legislative session by Senate Bill 263, which created a program for the research use of industrial hemp, granted under the authority of the Agriculture Act of 2014, also called the 2014 Farm Bill. The department operated on a research or pilot program authority for 2 seasons, so the 2019 and 2020 growing seasons, pursuant to administrative rules and regulations set by the KDA. Under this research or pilot program, the department licensed individuals who operated as growers, distributors, processors, and state educational institutions. So if you have a chance, please take a look at Table 1 of, again, that document named Hemp Summary 11-3-2021. as it provides a breakdown of the licenses issued by KDA from 2019 to 2021. And again, I was just speaking about 2019 and 2020, where the KDA issued growers licenses for growers, distributors, processors, and state educational institutions. So coming on to our third year of hemp production in Kansas, the state has transitioned away from operating under the Research or Pilot Program Authority to a commercial program as granted by the 2018 Farm Bill. So states, territories, and tribal nations may operate pursuant to this authority under regulations set forth by the United States Department of Agriculture. Under the state program in Kansas, the KDA only licenses individuals operating as hemp producers, so the growers, which includes university participants, where no license is required to distribute lawful hemp, and processors register with the Office of the State Fire Marshal. So here in 2021, the KDA once again only licenses producers, where if you look at the differences in numbers, the last two seasons, we had roughly just over 200 growers, and this year we've licensed 81 growers. So moving on to licensing the last 3 years, I'm going to speak about the industrial hemp acreages. So this is licensed, planted, and harvested acreages over those 3 years. So in 2019, the department licensed roughly 5,800 acres, where only a fraction of that was planted. So just about 2,800, and just a fraction of what was planted was harvested. So just a little over 1,800 acres, encompassing 52 counties in 2019. In 2020, we saw a spike in licensed acreage, just about 10,000. A little more planted acreage, so almost exceeding 4,000, but only a small fraction of that was harvested due to a number of reasons. Moving on to 2021, the department licensed roughly 1,600 acres, and approximately 530 acres has been reported as planted to the department. Harvested numbers for planted acreage is underway, and we won't have a good capture of that until come the end of this month, the beginning of December. So looking at the information from 2019 to 2020, the acreages that were planted were for approximately 90% was approximately for cannabidiol, for CBD, where only 22% of the acreages reported as planted this year are for that floral material or cannabidiol production, where grain and fiber, seed and grain, and fiber were approximately 21, 40, and 17% respectively. So these values don't reflect year-end totals for planted acreages. It's just a capture from November 3rd, and this information is ultimately subject to change. Of the planted acreages in 2019, 54 acres tested non-compliant, and then 34 acres last year tested non-compliant, where roughly 890 and about 1,300 acres in 2019 and 2020 of which was planted were non-yielding or failed to produce a crop. Additionally, in that handout, it has a distribution of acres reported as planted with hemp for the 2021 growing season. And with that, I'm going to wrap up what I will provide and give the floor to the next speaker.
Thank you, Brady. And our next presenter is Bill Richmond with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Bill serves as the chief of the USDA Domestic Hemp Production Program. So with that, Bill, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Russell. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bill Richmond. I am the chief of the program at USDA. Our hemp program is housed in the Agricultural Marketing Service. And I tell you, I spent many years in a USDA office based out in Olathe. I spent a lot of time out in Garden City, Dodge City, riding around between dairies and feedlots. It was a lifetime ago, but it's really nice to spend a little bit of time with some Kansas folks, because it's been a little while. I I wanted to thank the KDA staff first. We've had an incredible working relationship with Secretary Beam, Ken Titus, Stephanie. The rest of the staff there have been incredible to work with. Following the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill, we embarked on about a 2-year-long rulemaking, which culminated with a final rule that was published in the early part of this year. Once that rule became active back in March, there was a lot of scrambling going on out across the different states as the different state departments of agriculture were trying to modify their own state rules to align with this final rule. KDA was one of the very first states to work through this process with us. It involves an incredible amount of back and forth, a lot of passing paper, a lot of really detailed editing of documents, and Kansas was one of the very first states in the country to work through that process and get approved under the 18 Farm Bill and under the final rule. So we certainly appreciate that so much. We don't have too much time, and I don't want to spend too many minutes getting into the minutia of the requirements of the program. I did want to mention a couple of highlights, a couple of exciting things that we have going on in our program. So as a little bit of background, in the 2018 Farm Bill, Congress required us to share certain information with law enforcement about hemp growers and the locations where hemp is being grown in real time. So what that means in practice is that we were required to take all this information that we collect from state departments of agriculture like KDA, from tribal governments, and from individual producers, condense and combine and formulate all that data in a way that makes sense to law enforcement and make it available to them so they can have clear and accurate information around folks that are growing hemp, folks that are licensed to grow hemp, and folks that are not licensed to grow hemp. And so in the last month, we've gone live with this system. Law enforcement is now able to log into this system and see real time every licensee in the state of Kansas and every other state. They can zoom in to see an aerial map of the physical growing locations, whether it's outside in a center pivot or a big growing area, whether it's down to an acre in someone's backyard, whether it's an indoor growing facility in a greenhouse, a hoop house, or in a warehouse. They can see all that information in real time. So much of the conversation, so many of the conversations we have with locally elected officials has to do with this conversation around law enforcement, around how we can make sure that police officers know when someone is illegally growing hemp or when they're illegally doing something else. And this is where we spend the bulk of our time on the phone, talking with local, state and local officials, state and local law enforcement, verifying this type of information. So that is the number one message I want to share with this group tonight. We have that information available as you receive questions from law enforcement in your community about how they can know when someone is operating legally under the requirements of the program. There is a database that we can walk them through, get them access to. We've done a lot of outreach with Kansas law enforcement. We've spent a fair amount of time walking folks through that registration process, how to use the system, but we have a long way to go. And I want to make sure that everyone knows that that's available, that my team and our staff is a resource to work with you, with your constituents and your law enforcement community to make sure they have the most up-to-date and accurate information around the licensed hemp growers in your community. So the other thing I wanted to really drive home is that we have a very extensive website. There are some fairly complex rules around growing hemp, around licensing, sampling, testing, compliance, remediation, information sharing. All these different regulations that we have in place around hemp are available, and we try to present and explain them in very straightforward ways on our website through a range of different types of webinars, Q&As, those types of things. We have an email address that I will share here in the chat before we jump off, and also a phone number. If any of your customers or constituents, and especially our folks here from the industry, growers or processors, have any questions at all about what the regulations are, you have a specific situation on your farm or your facility that you need guidance on, am I allowed to do this? How do I address this situation? Reach out to us. That's what my team is available for. We're very happy to talk to anyone through the regulations at any time. So with that said, I'm going to hang out here for a couple minutes. I'm happy to take questions. I think we have about 4 more minutes. Otherwise, I will keep an eye on the chat, and I think we have a little bit of time at the end. Very happy to answer any questions that you might have. So appreciate it. We appreciate the invitation and looking forward to the rest of the program.
Appreciate the information, Bill. Thank you very much for presenting. And again, we do ask that you mute your mic until we get to that point where we can address the question.
Cindy, do you have a question there?
Okay, I have a question. It looks like we have a lot of farms or locations that have, I don't want to say been non-compliant, but are not meeting the guidelines. How do we educate, inform, or help them do the right thing in their crop placement? Because the percentages I heard before you were pretty low on harvest. And so if this is going to be a meaningful crop, I think it's important that the people understand what the limitations are, the qualifications are. And so how do you see that right now?
I'd say the very first place to turn is to the KDA staff. So the first place to go is to Braden to connect those growers with the program folks to talk through the exact situation around why they may not be complying. If they are brand new growers, if they've never grown hemp before, it's a difficult thing to grow compliant hemp with THC less than 0.3%. We have a large problem in the countryside, especially with our new growers, around the difficulties around finding compliant hemp genetics. There are a lot of folks out there selling seeds and clones, baby hemp plants, to brand new growers, claiming that they are compliant, that they will grow low THC when they become fully mature, and that's just not the case. So we are trying very hard, working through state level extension offices. We have an incredible amount of research going on right now through the Agricultural Research Service of USDA, for example, to make sure that we have better compliant hemp genetics and strains out there for our new and beginning farmers. And I'm to be honest with you, it's going to take a little while to get everybody to a place where stable, compliant genetics are widely available to folks.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you for that question, Cindy. As we kind of transition into our producer panel, would like to point out the Kansas Water Office provided funding through the Water Research Coordinating Group to provide help for Kansas State Research and Extension to do research to help out producers. So with that, we're going to lead into our producer panel, and I'll turn it over to Dana to lead that discussion.
Great. Thanks, Russ. I really appreciate that. And for the growers that are joining this evening, and tonight we're going to have with us Tom and Debbie Kreitz, Nate Hyatt, Derek Ross, and Melissa Nelson. And earlier we sent out a Meet the Panelists PDF, so that way you guys could meet them ahead of time. With that, so excited to get on with this discussion. We had some prepared questions for our growers, and we took those off of the questions that were submitted during registration and came up with some of our own as well. So excited to get to this. And so with that, Robin, if you want to pin the speakers so we can see their smiling faces, we'll get going. So I want to start out with Tom and Debbie. The question I have for you and for the rest of the panelists are, what was the greatest learning curve for you as you started growing industrial hemp?
Probably one of the biggest things we had was trying to figure out how to get it all harvested and dried in a timely manner, and complying with all the regulations. And that was probably the biggest learning curve we had.
Great. Nate, what about you guys?
The biggest learning curve for me was like switching over from like big agriculture into smaller, like essentially like less than an acre. I was used to running a big sprayer, 120-foot booms, this and that, and switching over to organic and not being able to spray and work the ground has been a big learning curve for me.
So basically you were growing it more like a horticulture crop than agronomic crop, since it was small acreage, lots of hands-on.
Yep. And we've got hoop houses and indoor grows that are the same way. So, yep.
Well, great. Derek, what about your operation?
I would agree with this first speaker just about the sheer amount of time it takes to hand harvest everything. I've been a part of smaller grow operations, around 102 plant, 100, 200 plant rotations. It scales up a lot differently when you start talking about thousands of plants in a time, and the people it takes to do it effectively in a timely fashion.
Great. Melissa, what about your operation there in Great Bend?
My answer is going to be a little different than you guys. I'm focused on large scale acres. I want fiber and grain. I'm looking for thousands of acres across Kansas and the Midwest to be grown. So our biggest learning curve was, how do we transition this equipment that we're already using for conventional crops and utilizing that in the hemp space so farmers can use this as a rotational crop and use it as a tool within their farming system.
Well, great. I want to follow right up with you, Melissa, being that you guys are large scale in what you're doing, and we'll go back through the group with this question. So then what was your biggest aha moment? So you've been growing for a few years. So as you're going with things, when did a light bulb go off and it was like, so what's been your biggest aha moment?
We're leaders in the country right now. People, we are one of the slower states that came on in 2019. We had growers in 2008 or 2014 in other states that were doing this, but everything was so cannabinoid focused. And we've really projected ourselves as leaders in the fiber and grain industry. And I really didn't realize that until this summer, when we got all the traction from around the country and even other countries interested in what we were doing here in Kansas.
Well, great. It is great, the things that are going on, following along with your social media, some great things with that. Derek, what about you guys? What about that aha moment?
I would think the first year, everybody wants to get started early and think growing bigger is better. But in reality, it came to, maybe starting a little bit later with your plants and have them smaller to be more easy to manage for insects, pests, weeds, those type of things, and focus more on quality and yields per plant as opposed to just trying to grow as big as you can.
Which is a different philosophy for Kansas producers, that going small is a whole different ball game.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Nate.
So like our biggest aha moment was when we moved into the retail space, and because we didn't have a place to go with our end product, and so moving into retail really gave us a good outlet on selling our products.
Tom, what about you and Debbie? What was an aha moment for you there in Shawnee County?
We had a lot of problems with too much moisture in the first season in 2019, and realized that a good portion of our field was really not a good field for growing hemp. We needed better drainage. So once we've got that figured out, we were able to grow a really good crop in 2020.
Well, that's great. to hear on that, which then leads me to the next question. I'm going to stick with you, Tom, since you talked about that piece with your soil and drainage with that. But so there's the growing piece of it. But what's been the hardest part to navigate over the past 3 years and the growing seasons that you've had?
Well, I think our hardest part is finding a market for our product, really. And so that, I think, is probably everybody's hardest moment right now, is finding a market. And Kansas, as a grower, we're limited to not being able to sell our flower in Kansas. And that definitely limits what we can do with our product.
That's good to hear. We've got the right people on the call to hear that. Nate, what about you guys? What's been the hardest part to navigate?
I've got to agree with him a little bit. Finding a place for our end product up until now has been one of the more difficult things for us. And also, feel like we're kind of cut off at the knees, not being able to sell our floral material.
Derek?
Oh, I would just say just the difference is on what people want in the marketplace. Like last year, there was a big shift to hemp derived cannabinoids that was going on. And that continues to change this year as different ones come out on the market, and just trying to stay ahead of the curve and finding the right contacts to take your material or your extracted material to someone to get it to market.
Melissa?
For us, it was just a genetics thing. Finding a variety, whether that farmer wants to be dual purpose and go for grain and fiber, whether they want to be more fiber focused. We also had the problem of finding a place or finding a home for our hemp. So we just created our own. So
you just took that problem and created an opportunity with it as well. So I want to stick with you, and Cindy, we're going to ask some questions at the end. After I get done with these prepared questions, we're going to open it up for your questions. So hang on to that question. Melissa, we've got state level and federal level represented here today. I want to start with the federal level. If you could change one thing about the commercial industrial hemp program at the federal level, what would that be?
the federal level, I would look at your harvest window, just because, again, this is a scalable thing for us. When you've got 1,000 acres of corn, it may take you 3 weeks to do that, depending on your weather pattern. So when you're laying down this fiber for hay, essentially, because you're baling it up, having that window to lay down your crop would be great, but it's making strides. We're going in a positive direction. It's now 30 days instead of 15, but I would really love a separation from fiber and CBD.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm guessing Bill Richmond's making some notes on his end with that. So Derek, what's one thing you'd change at the federal level?
I would change the harvest dates for the difference between, like she was talking about, between CBD and or the grain or fiber growers. That kind of puts them in a bind on the window, as opposed to growers like me who just focus on floral material. And then I'd like to see like a total THC content to be raised, to like a 1%, like's been pushed in petitions, instead of 0.3. I know it helped that the USDA raised it for being negligent over that, but it'd be nice to not worry about being negligent up to that point.
Got it. Nate, what about you at the federal level? What would be one change?
One change for me, just like Derek, the total THC raised to 1% possibly. And I think that would help us out as growers tremendously. We could have plants in the ground longer and really put out a better product that way.
All right, great. Tom, at the federal level, what would you like to see one change?
I'd agree with that. I think that the 1% level would let us raise a crop to full maturity and be able to realize the full oil content of our plants. At this point, we're having to harvest them early to be able to stay compliant.
Got it. So we'll stick right with you, Tom. What about the state level? What would you like to see changed at the state level?
basically the same thing and allow us to be able to sell flower products within the state of Kansas would help us quite a bit. It's legal to grow it, but it's not legal to sell it, which is quite a hindrance to a small time grower.
Got it. Nate?
Well, I hate to beat a dead horse here, but I'm going to say the same thing, that I wish we could sell our floral material out of our stores. So
I mean, now's the time to put it out there because we've got the right people on the call. Derek, what would you like to see changed at the state level?
That would be one of them. It kind of depends on where you're at in the part of the state. There's all kinds of places that you see floral material being sold in smoke shops all over. So it'd be nice to be able to do that and not have to worry about someone breathing down your neck on that. And then personally, I know a lot of people is in big commercial farming type stuff, and seeing the infrastructure being built out in co-ops to store grain or other places that can process fiber or hemp hurd for building materials. I think Kansas can have a great program with that if it can get going. I know a lot of people would like to do it, but don't personally want to put the investment into it. I think there's a great opportunity for that if the state would get on board and issue some type of grants or help different co-op associations with getting that physical infrastructure in place to be able to have incentive to grow those type of crops, because that's going to be the long-term future with hemp is them type of products.
Well, great. Melissa, do you want to round out the comment for changes at the state level?
Yeah, so mine would be a little different. While I respect the licensing and I understand the purpose of it, I would love to see it move to more a farm type scale, particularly for the fiber and grain, because sometimes, right now the license currently has lots, so you can put it within a mile and it can be under the same license, but have a lot. But like our farm is spread over, 2 counties. And so if I want to plant my dry land corners, like you would milo or wheat, that's going to have a larger than 1 mile radius. And so if I have to do $1,000 licensing for every field that I want to put this on that's outside that 1 mile range, it gets really uneconomical quickly.
Got it. I'm just going to stick with you, Melissa. We've got just a couple minutes left for this part of this evening. So we're going to kind of combine the last 2 questions that we prepared and you guys had earlier about, where do you see the industry going in Kansas and nationwide, to include what trends that you might see maybe in the next 3 years. So, where do you see it headed, Kansas and nationwide, and possibly some trends?
Trends are going to go towards fiber just for the scalability of it. Like I said, CBD, there's definitely a purpose and a place for it, but in terms of scalability, fiber and grain is where it's at, particularly once it gets approved for animal feed and grain. But hempcrete, natural building, all this green build and sustainability, carbon credits, et cetera, that can all be captured in your fiber and grain grows. And so I really feel like farmers are going to transition more that way.
Got it. Derek, where do you think things are headed and some trends?
I'd have to agree with her long term. Hemp can be used and be, it's a green product. Has a lot of different purposes, from fuel to grain, feed to, actual domestic use for humans for food. I think CBDs will be more of a niche market in the near future, especially if Kansas ever develops and gets on board with the rest of the country on some type of a medical or recreational marijuana program. It'll just be a supplement at that point. So, long term, I think we need to get on board and push the grain and fiber side, before we get left behind. Kansas is always last to the dance, it seems like, and we're getting surrounded by other participants in the party.
Got it. Nate, what do you see being brought to the dance?
I'm a CBD guy, and I agree with them too. I think CBD has its place in the medical arena, but I think like long term, I think fiber and grain is really going to take over in Kansas, especially. Our farmers are set up for that already, and it's going to take off. And then even nationwide for the next, I don't know about the next 3 years. I think it's kind of, our infrastructure isn't necessarily there yet, but it's well on the way, as we can see. So.
Got it. Tom, you want to round out this session for us?
Well, I definitely think that we need to go to the feed and grains cattle all around us here, and definitely I can see where that's something that we've got to move to as quickly as possible and get it approved for animal feed. So hopefully we can get that done as soon as possible.
Well, great. Well, with that, that ends the prepared questions that we had for our panelists. Russ, I'm going to turn it back to you. I know we've had some questions in the chat. We had one earlier. We had a hand raised with it. So with that, Robin, you can unpin our speakers. Russ, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Dana. And we had some great discussion there, and it did raise several questions. And Derek kind of alluded to the first question there, but I'm going to throw this to Melissa. What are some of the other products that we're seeing produced from the industrial hemp side of it?
Absolutely. So that's an exciting industry. Paper right now is a very big product for the non-woven textile fibers. Right now, to grow for fiber, it's very different for textile grade versus non-textile grade. So you've got fiber, you've got bioplastics. That's one of our big customers. You've got water bottles that can break down in 80 days once they hit the microbes in the soil. Very different from the petroleum-based plastics that you see now. You've got hemp wood. If you can grow, or if you can make it with paper, plastic, or wood, you can replace a piece of it with hemp. Hempcrete is also the hot topic right now and where most of our sales are going.
Thank you, Melissa. Next question comes from John. Can someone address whether the economic potential is in CBD oil, flower, or the fibrous industrial hemp? Nate, you kind of touched on the CBD side. Do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I can. You know, I think for smaller farmers and just getting into it, I think CBD could be a move right now, but I think eventually the market's gonna get saturated and you're gonna have to move into like the fiber and grain side of things.
Derek, you want to chime in on that, or? You're muted, Derek.
I've been primarily a flower grower, and I've been very fortunate to be able to have places to distribute my flower outside the state. I see that still being an option because a lot of people like it as opposed to just full strength, like medical marijuana or recreational. And then, you know, the CBD side on the extractor oils, if you can have your niche brand and kind of have your own little place, I think, you know, someone could do fairly well with that. So, you know, and I think to go back on it, the building materials and feed and stuff is going to be the big picture, you know, thing in the long run.
Thank you, Derek. So we do have a hand raised. Cindy Neighbor, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question, please.
Thank you. When we were looking at hemp growing in ag several years ago, we had a lot of conversation about what hemp could be used for. Did we as an ag committee give enough foundational information to those that wanted to grow hemp and where it could be used and how it could be used? Did we miss out on that? And what can we do to help our hemp growers be more productive and be able to sell their product in the areas that they want to do?
Okay, but you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so, you know, a few years ago when you were providing support and you were getting this program up and going, fiber and grain was a $200 million industry and CBD was a $2.2 billion. So people naturally gravitated towards that way. Because this industry is so rapidly growing and changing and evolving, I think just spreading informational, educational talks like these webinars, just opening farmers up to the possibility that fiber and grain is an option. A lot of people don't realize the scale in which this market is growing. And so just educational pieces like you're doing is extremely helpful. And one more thing, the KDA does a great job, at least for us. If there is anybody that's interested in growing fiber and grain that has reached out to the KDA, they do a good job of connecting us, and then we can connect them if we can't meet their needs. So I think you guys are doing a good job of spreading the word and getting people connected where they need to go.
Thank you.
And thank you, Melissa. There's been several questions or comments about using hemp in the animal feed, and we do have Ken Bowers on the call this evening. So Ken, would you like to kind of address where we're at with that regulation and approval?
So sure, we're really at the same point we've been all along. Basically, there really hasn't been much movement in a definition for any hemp or CBD in animal feed yet. So I know there's 2 researchers at K-State that are working on the safety for hemp in cattle feed. And then there's one AFCO definition for hemp seed cake for laying hens. And that's really all I know about it so far.
Thank you very much, Ken. Thank you for joining us this evening. With that, we're going to move to our next segment. And our next speaker is Doug Jorgensen. And Doug is with the Kansas State Fire Marshal's office. And so Doug's going to provide us a little update from his side. So Doug, the Zoom is yours.
Thank you very much. Nice to be able to visit with everybody this evening. I do have a few slides, and I think somebody, yeah, there we go. And you can just go to the first one. You know, I appreciate the invite and to share some information on the processing side. The processing side, regulating or overseeing the processors in the state is, you know, we're actually pretty new to us. We're into our 2nd year of doing it. We were approached by Department of Ag, local, state, and law enforcement, and the AG's office to consider if we would take on that responsibility. And so with working with those other groups, we decided to do that. You'll see in the slide that in 2019, Ag issued 35 processing licenses. And then in 2020, they issued 24. A lot of people, though, I think bought licenses and they never even started processing. Because currently, we only have 9 active processors in the state, both chemical extraction, and we use the term agricultural for like Melissa's operation in South Bend and Burtwater down by Larned. There's not a lot of people left in the processing industry in the state right now. You know, when we first received the responsibility to oversee the processors, we actually took the list that Ag had and we contacted everyone, and we identified who was still in business, who was not in business. And then we went out and we visited with everybody that was still in business. We observed their operations, how they were operating, and there's a big gamut on types of operations. We go from some very nice commercial operations that have been set up to a processor that has a 14 by 14 room built in a Quonset hut. So there's the whole gamut of where processors are. And it's the same way on the agricultural side. We have South Bend where they're separating the different parts of the plant and then selling those. We have one agricultural processor that all they do is dry and grind the plant into a powder, and then they're wanting to sell that powder as a supplement. So, you know, as we go forward, I'm not sure where the industry is going in the state simply because of the lack of processors. And I know a lot of you have already mentioned that a lot of your product you're sending out of state for different reasons. We've had a couple processors close up shop. One moved to Missouri, one moved to Oklahoma. And then a number of the chemical processors for CBD have gotten out of the business because they feel that the CBD market is sort of flooded right now. And they can't make any profit, or at least a decent profit, in processing their crop into CBD oil. So there's a lot of things I think playing into that. We became involved in this the first year by a budget proviso by the legislature. And then last session, there was actually a statute change that brought us into overseeing the processors in the state by actual statute. We worked with the industry and the legislature on the rules and regs process, on setting up the rules and regulations for the processors in the state. Those regulations were actually published last month, so they're now official. We notified all the processors of that so that they could take a look at those. But we had some very good input from the processors in the state on what those rules and regulations should look like. We also had input from the law enforcement community on those too. So, you know, the main issue for the processors in the state, just like it is the growers, is the THC content. And when you're processing something into CBD oil, one of the byproducts is pure THC. But it's been our observation that there's very little THC that's actually left after a chemical extraction process. And with the agricultural processors, where they're just drying and separating the plant, there's really no availability for them to pull THC out of those plants because of how they do their operation. You can probably go to the next slide. We currently, out of the 9 processors, we have 1 processor that is using a cold press extraction method. They simply strip and dry the plants, and then the oils are removed just by high pressure. That facility actually also operates an indoor grow. We have 6 chemical extraction method processors in the state. 1 is CO2, and the other 5 are solvent extraction operations, and they use ethanol. So again, different variety of processors in the state. Go to the next slide. And we have our agricultural processors. When we did the rules and regulations, we actually separated the 2. We have $1,000 license fee for the chemical processors. Because again, that's where, if there's going to be a subversion of the THC, that's where it's going to happen. It's not going to happen on the agricultural side. And we charge a $500 license fee on the agricultural side. We have 2 agricultural processors licensed right now. Again, 1 is drying and then separating the different parts of the plants, flowers, leaves, seeds, stalks. They're even separating the stalk material to the hard woodier part that they're using for animal bedding. And they're separating the fiber that they can then possibly sell to somebody for clothing, shoes, different things that the fiber can be used for. We can go to the next slide. Out of the 9 current processors in the state, we have 7 that are completely completed and licensed and approved. We have 2 facilities that are making improvements, but some of the things they need, an exhaust fan and some other hardware, they're having supply chain issues. So they are still in operation. We've given them a variance so that they can keep their doors open and keep operating. But we hope to have both of those completed by the end of this month. And then we currently actually have, as of today, 3 new agricultural processor applications that we're working on. So in the very near future, I would say probably by the end of this month, we'll have 2 more agricultural processors licensed and approved. And a 3rd one might take a little longer, but we hope to have that one done by the end of the year. And a couple of the new agricultural processors, the only thing we're waiting for are some fingerprints from some of the owners and some of the employees to finish those. So far this year, we've done 80 backgrounds out of the 9 processing operations. Actually, it would be 12 counting the 3 ones that are currently in process. So we've done quite a few backgrounds. Most of the operations have anywhere from 2 to 6 employees. Burt Wada is the largest with 17, just because of their operation also does other types of agricultural processing. So they have more employees, and they actually have 2 locations too. So, and with that, I guess I would open it up to any questions anybody might have.
Appreciate the update, Doug. And we'll keep an eye out on questions as we move through. Should have time again towards the end. At this time, it's time to transition to the processor panel. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dana to lead that facilitation.
Thanks, Russ. Appreciate that. And that was a super segue for us, Doug, on our processors. And tonight joining us, we have Heath Martin, Jeff Wilkins and Tina Kelly, Melissa Nelson, and Weston Burt. Heath, Jeff and Tina, they utilize an extraction method, and Melissa and Weston are on the ag side with the processing fiber and seed. So we'll go ahead and get the processor panel going, and we'll get that tagged, Robin, so we can get started here. We're going to start with Heath. So the first question that I have for you this evening, Heath, is, as we enter year 3 of growing and processing industrial hemp in Kansas, what has been the biggest roadblock for you as a processor?
One of the biggest roadblocks that we've had is just continuity in programs. So we've had essentially 3 different levels of oversight in 3 different years. So initially it was a KDA pilot program, then it was going to transition to a KDA commercial or a commercial program. And then in year 2021, we were turned over to the fire marshal. So that there were 3 different sets of rules to play by, and it seems like it's ever evolving. If there was some continuity in that, it certainly would have helped us out both with investment and the way that we did our business. Some of the roadblocks also are just market derived roadblocks that we've found. We did show up a little bit late to the dance. So there were other states that were much further ahead than we were in establishing a market for our CBD products. We've gotten lucky, and through hard work, we've been able to break into that sector. But that was definitely a challenge in the beginning.
Well, great. Jeff and Tina, we're going to jump to you. Good evening. And what's been your biggest roadblock over the last 3 years?
I would have to say the banking industry. Being able to find a bank that would be willing to even have a hemp account, whether it would have been for the grow, the plants, or just the CBD part of it. I think there's a lot of gray area in that industry. We've been fortunate. We've had to move banks a couple times, but the bank we're working with now seems to be happy, and we seem to be happy. So
but there's still no money you still can't get any loans or anything, to improve some of the improvements that need to be made to facilities or things like that. You still just can't waltz in and get a loan for any of that. So.
Got it. Well, great. That's great, because we had the Kansas Bankers Association on at the end of this. So we got some ears going on with that. Melissa, on the processing side, what's been your biggest roadblock the last 3 years?
I call it a roadblock. Is more of like a detour. We get manufacturers coming to us all the time that say, hey, we want to use hemp. We don't know how to do it. How do we do it? So we've had to become a manufacturer / engineer / problem solver as to what specifications do they need so we can continue to grow this market. and then supply for us. And so we do a big push for education, creating growers groups, providing that support, because making sure that you have the product to feed our facility is very, very critical and probably our biggest roadblock at this time.
Got it. Weston, what about you this evening? What would you join and voice for a roadblock?
Yeah, that would be dust control. When it comes to processing hemp for their cannabinoids, anytime you handle the product, you're going to lose cannabinoids. There's no getting around that. You know, they're primarily lost via poor dust collection. So for example, if our system is 90% efficient, or we're losing 10% of the product via dust loss, that's going to translate to say 50 to 70% cannabinoid loss. If you want to maximize your CBD percentage overall, you're always thinking about dust and how to capture it. So for us, our biggest roadblock is, I'd say, creating a more efficient dust collection system.
All right, Weston, we're going to stick with you and work back through those on the panel. The state fire marshal is on the call, and we just heard from him, and they now have the regulatory responsibilities for industrial hemp processors in Kansas. What one change would make your life easier as a processor?
Well, Doug and everyone at the fire marshal's office, they've been great. You know, they're doing everything they can to make sure that the processors are successful. Now, from a reg standpoint, I was still under the impression that processors and, well, I guess I should say extractors and those that are doing more on an ag mechanical basis were considered as one. Maybe I missed something and that's not the case anymore. Maybe there is a separate distinction where they've got different regs. If that's not the case, though, if we're still under the same all the same regulations, that's something that I would suggest changing in the long run, making a separate designation, at least in terms of compliance for those that are extracting and those that are just handling. But again, maybe I've missed something in that. So, but otherwise, I think everything's been great.
Great. Melissa. You're on mute. You're muted, Melissa. There we go.
Okay. I knew I was going to do that at least once. I was going to say the separation between CBD and fiber, like as with Weston, I was not aware that these have now officially been separated. I have nothing but good things to say about working with the fire marshal. I appreciate that he listens to our concerns. We feel very heard, and then he's implementing these changes that we're asking. So it's all moving in the right direction for us.
Well, great. Tina and Jeff, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the state fire marshal has been nothing but wonderful for us. When he was talking about the processors that started in a little Quonset building with a room by 14 by 14, and that's our operation, very small. And we too, like a lot of people in this industry, got into it because there was going to be a lot of money and it was going to be quick and it was just going to be a phenomenal deal. Well, what we've learned from this process is that it isn't so. So we've been kind of financially tight on our operation, and the state fire marshal has worked with us above and beyond just to allow us to keep our doors open and to be a part of it. I mean, which says a lot to the couple that just doesn't have, a ton to put in it, but I think we're going to stick it out, and eventually we're hoping for big things. So.
Well, great. Heath.
I think on the processing side, Doug's definitely been good to work with. I think there needs to be definitely some designation between the types of processing that are being done. I mean, I know Melissa and Weston, ultimately they're on the agricultural side. We are on a solventless or a CO2 extraction platform, and then others use hydrocarbons. However, no matter what extraction method you use to remove the CBD from the floral material, we were all treated or all cast under that same umbrella. So ultimately, we had to incur some things as far as infrastructure and code footprints and testing on safety apparatuses, which none of which was bad, that I don't believe we should have had to do, because ultimately there wasn't a great fire risk in our facility, like there would be somebody using ethanol or a different hydrocarbon. The other thing that I would say is just maybe there needs to be a greater understanding, and Doug has certainly been to, I think, all of our facilities that are on this call, a greater understanding in how the process actually works, and if there is any THC, or if the THC is still in with the CBD oil, how that gets diluted back out. I think the statement that a lot of us have pure THC laying around or in our facilities is inaccurate. And everything that ever comes out of our facility in a retail product that would go to a consumer is absolutely compliant. So I think there just needs to be some more understanding by the regulatory body, whoever that may be. We've obviously had 2 of them now in 3 years, on exactly how our process works, whether it be ourselves as CBD extractors, or the people in the ag space.
Got it. Those are great suggestions, and good thing that the fire marshal's on, and we still have the USDA on. So Heath, I'll stick with you. At the federal level, what is one change that would allow your business to grow and prosper?
There's 2 of them that come to mind right off the top of my head is continuity between states. We have a lot of people from out of state that reach out to us to use our services, and their compliance levels versus Kansas compliance levels, they may not always add up. And that's something that I think if we could put that over one major umbrella and figure out, hey, if it's legal in the nation, it's legal in our state, and we can start that interstate commerce and bring obviously revenue to our industry and our state, that would be great. The other thing that I would say is the THC limits on it. I grew up in an ag background, ag community. I feel like by limiting us to that 0.3 number, we are, for lack of a better analogy, we're cutting our wheat 3 weeks early. We are not allowing these plants to mature to their full capacity. And if we want our growers to prosper, our processors to prosper, and us to really put ourselves on the map as a CBD leader, we need to be able to get full maturity out of the crops we grow.
Well, great. Jeff and Tina, what about the federal level? What would help out?
Go ahead.
I think we would agree with what Heath just said. And then also going back to the banking issue, just an example for us, we are building a retail facility here, but in order to get the loan, the building loan, we had to almost totally disconnect from the processing facility. Nobody in this town wanted to loan us money to build the building because we own the processing facility. It wasn't credit, it wasn't anything else. It was the simple fact that we own the processing facility.
Got it. Melissa, at the federal level.
Let's take it back more to our growers, because at the end of the day, you can have the best processing facility in the world, but if you don't have the supply to feed it, supporting our growers and creating that system is going to be top priority for us, particularly at the federal level, the THC level, and to compare it to something that you guys are very familiar with, we're basically glorified hay grinders. And so it really doesn't matter what the THC or CBD content is in our plants because they've been bred out. But regardless, I'm grinding it up. It's going into a wall of a house or flooring. So if the THC and CBD levels really don't matter for us, and we would love to see that supported.
Great. Weston.
Yeah, I guess maybe 2 things. Hemp, despite being fully legal, it's still operating in sort of a gray market. For all intents and purposes, it's treated about the same as marijuana. So for example, some people know it here, advertising hemp-based products online is nearly impossible. Shipping them is pretty much the same. So I don't know exactly how this sort of reconciles itself at a national level, but I'd like to see the FDA or the USDA publicly endorse the sale and movement of hemp-based products, if for no other reason than to better incentivize companies like FedEx and Facebook to allow everyday transactions. The other one, hemp, it's handled extensively by humans. As one of the growers noted, it's much, right now it's closer to horticulture than it is agriculture. Hopefully that changes someday. But it is handled a lot more than conventional foods. This makes it very susceptible to pathogens, E. coli and salmonella specifically. But there's no great reg standards for eradicating those pathogens for hemp right now. Gamma irradiation is going to be the preferred method, but the FDA, unless it's for animal consumption, they're not allowing, they're not going to allow that for anything that's going to be extracted, or hemp seeds, I believe. So until they allow that, a salmonella outbreak in flour or CBD oil or seeds, it's just a matter of time. It's going to happen.
Got it. We have about 1 minute left in this session, so I want everybody to have a chance to ask this last question. Heath, I'm going to start with you. Same as how we ended with the growers. Where do you see the industry headed in Kansas in the next 3 years or nationwide? And what trends do you see in processing?
Sure, I certainly think that the cannabinoid market continues to grow nationwide and worldwide, actually. There's certain countries that are coming on, and we've got some export opportunities there. I'll go back to what Melissa said before. I think there is just an exponential amount of opportunity in byproduct, fiber, hurd, building materials, plastics. And just because I'm a CBD processor doesn't mean I can't take part in those. My byproduct can go right over to Melissa after it's been extracted, and we can make hemp wood, hemp flooring, animal feed, which I think is huge, and other products out of it. This could be a very holistic and circular approach. And I hope it gets there.
Well, great. Jeff and Tina.
Well, I'm with Heath on both of his things. Yeah, I think the potential for the fiber and the grain is huge. It's really neat to see, because when we got involved in this process, we were hoping to do all of it. We were hoping to process the fiber, and the market wasn't there on the fiber side. So it's neat to see that that's moving forward. And, I hope to see the large scale farms in Kansas. I know where we planted last year, the farmer put wheat or soybeans back in, and his soybeans where that wheat was planted almost produced 70 bushel per acre. So he was pretty impressed with the remediation in the soil from the hemp. So, there's a lot of possibilities out there. So I just like to see it continue to grow in all aspects, the CBD and the other parts.
Well, great. Melissa, you've seen a lot of changes even in the last year with your operation and where things are going. What do you see with those that you're working with?
This gets me really, really excited. We're creating a network throughout the Midwest, because we know that as farmers ourselves, transportation is the most inefficient cost that farmers have. And so instead of creating this conglomerate facility right here in Great Bend, we're basically creating a network. So wherever that farmer is closest to, he's going to take that facility there. So that's the trend we see moving. Yes, there's large facilities throughout the United States that are trying to get up and going, but we're working very hard to create a network that is more conducive to farmers' location.
Well, great. Weston, you want to finish this up with where you see things headed in the next 3 years in Kansas or nationwide?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard for me to say, given how young the industry is. I just don't, I can't say with any great conviction. I've got a lot of ideas and guesses. I do think, though, I mean, the hemp industry is very, very young. It's still very much like the Wild West. I've said that many times. And there's a lot of shady characters out there. It's everyone who's grown or process knows, especially in the CBD side. So I do think, though, you're going to see in the next 3 years a significant amount of maturity in just the business dealings internal to the industry. At least I hope so.
Well, great. Thank you. Russ, I'm going to turn it back to you for questions from those who are participating tonight.
Thank you, Dana. And it sounds like, just like with any newer industry, there's always those growing pains that we have to work through. So one of the questions talks about, being successful as a producer. So the question to the processors, do you guys work with those growers? Do you have contracts? Do you have those growers that you're specifically buying from every year? So, and we'll just throw that out. Melissa, go ahead. You got your hand up.
Yeah, so we try to make this as similar to the grain industry as possible. We're trying to make this as congruent with other practices that farmers are doing. So we actually have a written contract. In the grain industry, you contract bushels per acre. We don't do that because production is so scattered right now and inconsistent. So we just are trying to get an acreage amount that we want them to bring to our facility. It gives them peace of mind that they have some place to go, and it gives us peace of mind that we're getting those acres to feed our facility.
Heath?
Yeah, we do that as well. We're similar to Melissa in the aspect that we're gonna sit here and say, hey, here's your dollar amount, grow this crop. Ultimately, it's going to have to meet certain specifications. And we've got obviously multiple growers that have worked with us year after year. But that can be very tough to do in a crop that still is in its infancy, and not every grower is maybe as well versed in this as others. So we certainly work with people, but it's got to work for everybody, the processor included.
Weston?
Okay, so you're asking if we've got contracts with growers in state, out of state. Is that what you're asking?
Correct. How do you work with those growers? Do you kind of have the same growers come to you every year?
No, no, I haven't contracted anything. It is a market for buyers right now, for processors. So there's a lot of opportunity out there to buy really, really good biomass for not a lot of money. And so we haven't contracted with anyone, but it's really, really tough to grow hemp and to grow good high CBD hemp. And so anyone that we've dealt with, we want to make sure that they want to keep growing. So, I think that, well, we're not contracting. I think we might at some point. We're trying to give growers, any growers that we can find, whether it's in state or out of state, a good price for their product, because you can get a good deal, but it's one thing to get a good deal now and never have the opportunity to deal with them again, with especially someone that grow really good stuff, versus maybe paying a little bit more and having that come back the next few years, which is what we hope for.
Thank you. Now we're going to go back to Ken Bowers from KDA for this question. The question from Mary Ware on using hemp for pet food. So Ken, you want to talk again about that?
Sure. So right now there is no legal hemp or CBD ingredient that can be put in animal feed. So yeah, there's a process that all ingredients, animal food ingredients, go through to get approval, and unless they're common and usual, and FDA does not consider hemp or CBD common and usual. So, and those two that I mentioned earlier were the only two that are in the process right now. So
appreciate that, Ken. So we're running tight on time, so we're going to move ahead and get to the next part. And actually, the next part is a little bit of me. So one of the things that we did to kind of help those producers out, we do have with the Ag Business Development Division and the Ag Marketing, we provide licensing guides to help those agriculture producers, processors, as well as agribusinesses in any kind of sector navigate the regulatory environment. So it's kind of a step-by-step. This is who you need to call for this, and this is who you need to call for this, and these are the permits and licenses that are required. So we have developed and finalized the new, for fiscal year 22, the Industrial Hemp Producers Guide, and that's available on our website, and it should have been emailed out, I think, Dana, to everyone that registered. So that hemp producers resource guide really does provide that connective piece. And that's what we try to do in the ag marketing division, is just like it was mentioned earlier, creating that network. That's exactly what we're trying to tap into as well. So when we get calls from people wanting to start producing hemp, we know that we can call on Melissa and Weston and Tina and Jeff and Heath to provide that expertise on the processing side, so they know where they can go and what they can grow in their area. So really, we're trying to be the connector directors for those people that are just getting started. So please check out that Industrial Hemp Producers Resource Guide. So with that, we're going to turn it over because we had several questions about the banking industry and several comments. So with us this evening from the Kansas Bankers Association is Kelly Vanswall. So Kelly, take it away.
Hi, thank you to Secretary Beam and the Kansas Department of Ag for having us. We're so excited to be a part of this conversation. And I'm sorry to hear that some of you have had some issues with banking. On our side, our hands are kind of tied in a little bit. So two of our biggest issues with financing hemp related products is one, crop insurance. The way we understand it is if the crop THC level is too high, it has to be burned. And then that burning is not covered by crop insurance. So if we take anything for collateral that's not covered in that way, we'll just lose our shirt on that. And then our other issues with licensing. Right now, though, there's no exception for banks or financial institutions. So the license has to be in the individual loan officer's name. And then if the financial institution has to foreclose, the loan officer has to have the license for that particular, not only just crop, but plot. So then you're requiring this of all of your loan officers instead of having just the bank be licensed. So those are kind of two of our biggest issues. The Kansas Bankers Association put a little survey out to our members to see how they're handling hemp products. We had a variety of answers. We had a lot of bankers respond who said they haven't had any interest in it. They've had some bankers respond who say they've had some interest, but they're having a hard time getting their board to approve it. Like you guys said, this is kind of in a gray area still. And so until there's some more understanding and stability about the difference between hemp and marijuana, I think that's going to be a struggle. And then we had some who said they have made these loans and they have not been successful. So they've done it for either people who just wanted to purchase land, or they've done it for actual growers and producers. But the producers were having a hard time finding material to process, and then it's still kind of a trial and error. So those who have made loans, it hasn't been successful. But the KBA would love to be a part of these conversations, and we would love to help with the education aspect. I met Melissa actually earlier at a similar panel, and we've kind of reached out to them to come talk to some of our bankers. We have a Kansas Ag Bankers division. So if the KDA or anyone on this call would like to reach out to us about something, I think this is a great opportunity to get some people in the room so we can kind of figure out more about it and how we can move forward together. That's all I've got really, but if you have any specific questions, please let me know. I'm going to put my email in the chat box as well. And if you need to reach out to me about anything, I'd be happy to help.
Thank you, Kelly. And so we do have, that's kind of the end of the presentations there and our speakers. So we do have time for questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand or throw it into the chat there. And Kelly, like she said, she just put her email address in the chat there, so you can reach out to her at any time. And I know any of the folks on our panels, producers, processors, are more than happy to talk to anybody about the process of starting out growing or the processing itself. Just checking out the chat here for any questions. Also want to make sure we understand whether it's Braden Hawk and his team in the industrial area or in ag marketing or Dana. Our job is here to support everybody in the whole industry. We're definitely not the experts, but we've brought together the experts tonight with the processors and producers. So Dana, anything else?
I do. Bill, go ahead. You were started in there.
Yeah, just I've been taking notes here, and I can try to respond to some of these questions that have come up over the last hour. So the first one is related to total THC and increasing that threshold from 0.3 up to something a little bit higher. And I'll tell you, that is something that USDA cannot do. That requires an act of Congress. That threshold is established in the 2018 Farm Bill. If Congress changes that threshold, we will work to enact it as quickly as we possibly can, but it's something that we cannot do at USDA. Because of that, that is why in the final rule, we included a lot more flexibility around things like the harvest window from 15 to 30 days, the negligence threshold, allowing for remediation on the farm, allowing for performance-based sampling, all of these other flexibilities to try to give as much wiggle as we can while still meeting the statutory requirements. So that's what will have to happen to bump that limit up. So around the limitations with animal feed, so there is a very motivated industry group right now. There are several, but the most prevalent one is called the Hemp Feed Coalition. So this is a group of folks that are actively working on putting forward proposals to FDA to work through that approval process to allow for hemp to be used as an animal feed ingredient. Again, it's just a matter of working through the approval steps with FDA, the same way that you do with human foods. It has happened for several hemp human foods. The process is referred to as GRAS, generally recognized as safe. So currently they have approved 3 different hemp-derived products for use in human foods. Heath's question about continuity between states, I'll tell you that you're exactly right, and it's a big problem and something that we spend a lot of time on. Part of it is by design. We have given a lot of flexibility to state departments of agriculture, along with tribal governments, to really tailor their hemp programs the way that make the most sense for their own industries and for their own growers. And as you are very well aware, there is significant differences between states. And that is something that you are in the thick of and something that you experience on a daily basis. I don't have a great answer for that. I will tell you that there is a deadline by the end of this year. All states need to be operating under the same regulations that KDA is. So we talk about the final rule. All states have to be administering final rule compliant hemp programs by the end of this year. And that's something that my team is working furiously on, trying to work through all of the other states that did not work as quickly as KDA did to tailor their programs to meet the final rule requirements. So hopefully we'll see some improvement in the future. Hemp shipments. So moving hemp through the mail, whether biomass or finished products, we have worked extensively with United States Postal Service to make sure they understand the difference between hemp and between marijuana. They do have guidelines, public-facing guidelines around exactly what you need to do to be able to mail hemp and hemp products. That said, we still have an incredible number of seizures that are happening. A lot of stopped are significantly slowed down shipments. If you experience any issues with U.S. Postal Service, work through KDA. KDA can always contact us, and we can contact the U.S. Postal Service, whether it's a small post office. We do it every day. We have no problems with that. We are always happy to help with trying to expedite any issues around shipping. With FedEx, third-party carriers, we don't have as good of luck as we do with U.S. Postal Service, but we are always happy to try. Question around pathogen standards, salmonella. We certainly recognize that is an issue. Secretary Vilsack, Secretary of USDA, has tasked us with exploring ways to establish formal standards for hemp products in the US. And so that's something that we don't have in place yet. Something that we do have in place for most other agricultural commodities. These are the formal definitions that say this is an apple, this is an orange, this is what corn is. We have nothing, no federal rules that formally define what hemp is. We are working towards researching the most efficient and fastest ways to establish those standards. It involves a lot of industry input and a lot of industry collection, similar to what we did with the final rule. It involves a lot of negotiation with our trading partners. and we're also beginning that work as well. Questions around contracts. So concerns with contracts continues to be a major issue, primarily because in order to get crop insurance, you have to have a formal contract in place. We have recently awarded a several $million grant. There's some really incredible work being done with University of Kentucky, University of Maryland, to set up baseline guidance and some webinars, some really good educational outreach content for growers to help them establish contracts between growers and processors. So we're working hard to improve that, especially for our new and beginning farmers. That's all I have. That just responds to the notes I was taking, at least, but very happy to try to answer anything else you have in the last couple of minutes here.
Appreciate the comments, Bill. Doug, any follow-up from any comments you heard throughout the evening? On mute, Doug. Braden, how about from KDA's perspective, any follow-up comments there from anything you've heard?
Well, yeah, just to clarify a few things regarding, I guess, questions surrounding licensed, planted, harvested acreages. So, I mean, the largest discrepancies between planted and harvested acreages from 2019 to 2020 haven't been due to non-compliant crops, so crops exceeding 0.3% THC. It's been due to non-yielding or failed acreages. So, planted acreages that either didn't germinate or emerge or experienced heavy weed pressure and thus were not successful. Between 2019 and 2020, I mean, only roughly 54 and 34 acres respectively tested non-compliant of the crops that were, I guess, eligible for harvest.
Thank you, Braden. Any other questions? I've noticed in the chat, a lot of our processors and producers have thrown their emails in there, and please reach out to them. I know that they're more than willing to share their story and insights of what they've learned thus far into the industry. So with that, we have reached the end of our session, and I want to thank everybody for being a part of it tonight. Thank you, panel and presenters, for taking time out of your busy schedules to provide some information for everyone on the call. And a reminder, this will be recorded, is recorded, and it'll be available on our Ag Business Development webpage at the Ag Marketing at KDA, as well as the Industrial Hemp Programs FAQ page. With that, we are done for the evening. Thank you all and have a great rest of your evening.